welcome to Open to Connect. This is where I bring guests on because they have stories and stories of connection and how they've overcome those things and what they're doing in the meantime. And recruiters, whoever wants to come on and share stories. And today I am thrilled to have Jonathan Tennis. We have been mentoring together for a very long time, and both of us got laid off from the same company within a couple of months of each other. So we both have layoff stories. But one of the things I adore about what Jonathan does is like how he's filled his time before his layoff and then after. And we'll probably get into, who knows, mentorship and the power of just finding people and finding your people and all that. But would you like to introduce yourself? Because I could go on and on about how amazing you are. So what would you like to highlight?
Yeah, I appreciate it. I feel the same about you, Jacqueline. I'm so grateful that we found each other at Microsoft through Teams. And even that I think is a great connection story. But I'll save that for just a second. Jonathan Tennis. I'm a program manager. Most recently, I was a customer success account manager at Microsoft. I have done a variety of roles over the years, have a variety of titles. One of those is veteran. One of those is volunteer. One of those is mentor. But as far as jobs that pay, I've been a program manager for a long time, and that's primarily what the focus of my career has been. But I would love to start out by talking about how we met, and that's the power of networking, right? We were in a meeting, and in Teams, for those who aren't familiar with it, off on the side you can pull up the people who are in attendance, right? And so we're chatting back and forth. I'm liking the things that she's posting, she's liking the things I'm posting, and so we're sort of like, I was like, hey. If you're fans of movie references, I sort of live in GIFs and memes and such. So it's one of those things, very Step Brothers-ish. Did we just become best friends? Sort of thing. It's that sort of thing where we realized we were sharing similar communities and had similar interests, and so it sort of became sort of an idea of let's combine forces. And Jacqueline brought me into the fold with another one of our co-hosts on Mentorship Live, which meets Friday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern, 10:30 Pacific, and that is Len Lifeit. And so the idea of the three of us coming together, talking about our different perspectives, talking about, now that Jacqueline and I both don't have jobs, what's that like in between, being between roles. And for me, the way I've positioned myself since January when I lost my job, is that it gives me an opportunity to actually practice what I preach. Get out there and network, get out there and leverage my connections, get out there and keep myself busy. It's really easy, I think, to go, woe is me. And my story is one that I was actually sharing last night with an old Microsoft friend that I had dinner with. I was competitive for a role, and a role that I felt like I would have done really well at. I'd met the person who actually ended up getting the role. But I found out that afternoon that I didn't get that role. And then later that afternoon, I found out I no longer had a job at Microsoft. And so sort of the 1-2 punch of leaving. But one of the things that I've felt for a long time is that, you build this network, you build these connections. I might not have a Microsoft laptop or a Microsoft lanyard or badge anymore, but I still have those connections, right? I still regularly have dinner, I have coffee, I virtually meet or in person meet all of those folks that saw who I was and what I was while I was at the company are still in my network, are still working to support me, are rooting on my success. Some of those folks have moved on to other companies, right? And so now I have new connections there. And so I think that as a recent-ish convert to LinkedIn, something I would encourage people to do is, and there isn't a perfect number, right? You'll hear people, one of the things about giving away things for free on the internet, there's a lot of people who are willing to sell these things, right? They're out there saying you have to have 500 connections, you have to have 1,000 connections. I don't believe in that, but I do believe in having a network that you maintain. So, and I'm a terrible gardener, so if you've ever seen me try and garden, you'll understand how terrible a reference this is, but it's nurturing that garden. It's making sure that, hey, if you have 500 connections, making sure that you check in with them every once in a while, make sure that you go to their pages every once in a while, making sure that you're interacting with their posts, making sure that if you're sharing in a project, if they do something, highlighting the things that they're doing, commenting on their posts, celebrating their successes. I'll tell you, I love running through LinkedIn and using the continuous scroll to go through and just celebrate. Somebody graduated, somebody got a new job. It doesn't matter if I'm super close with them. I don't need to be to celebrate their success, to enjoy seeing the fruits of their labor and hard work pay off. But yeah, I think it's a great way for us to intro and kind of get into questions. Do we want to
Mhm.
focus the time on what we've done in between the role? Sort of like what
Yeah.
happened until now.
Well, there's so much, right? Because there's kind of when it happens that ping on identity, and I think for it's like you were talking about the power of networking, the power of building these connections, and doing that. Like that I'm constantly like, do it before you need it, do it before you need it, and I see so, and even with my own experience, having that safety net behind me took away so much overwhelm when it actually happened. What was overwhelming was the outpouring of support,
Mhm.
not, it's like in that scenario, you have, okay, now I have to do a resume I haven't touched in 10 years, a LinkedIn profile. What do I even put there? And all of this emotion around it. And you don't want to start networking in that space, right? So I think it'd be interesting to kind of talk about a little bit of what that like the feelings, right? The pings on identity, the things that like the longer I distant myself from employment, the more weird emotions set in that I didn't even expect. So
Mhm.
I know I have a story on that, many stories on that, but I would love to hear kind of that initial, and then where are you on that?
So I'm by no means an expert at feeling my feelings. I
We've
I
talked
was raised
about that many times.
yeah, I was raised by the generation that taught me to stuff everything down inside. Well, the problem with that is that no matter how big your container is, you'll eventually run out of room, and when that happens, it can't go anywhere else, and so the pressure is let off, and it's often misdirected. It's not done in a healthy, productive, loving, kind way. And so I've spent a lot of time letting that pressure off, right? And over the course of the last decade or so, as I've gotten healthier when it comes to how I approach feeling my feelings, and so the thing that I tell people, and let's make sure that we say the caveat here: neither one of us are mental health professionals, and so if you need actual help, seek help from mental health
Mhm.
professionals. But the things that I've taught and reading through and working with some of those folks is feeling your feelings. It hurts. Having a job, being employed is a core part of our identity, right? There are a lot of, and I've been fortunate enough to travel to a number of different cultures, but the American identity is closely tied to your job and to what you're doing. And oftentimes, let's be honest, how much money you make.
Mhm.
I live in DC and I love talking about going to networking events because folks often will tell you what they do before they even tell you what their name is. And so they'll say, I work for such and such, or I work at such and such, and then you may get their name, right? The funny thing about that is it's sort of it's right there in front of you as far as how important this is, right? And so all of a sudden, most of us only have one job, right, at a time. And so you go from having this business update meeting where you had a job, and then all of a sudden you don't. And so you're having to go through and process those feelings. And so the first thing I did was rest. Right, the very first thing I did was, hey,
Mhm.
what do I need to focus on? Right, I need to make sure that I'm taking care of my sleep, eating well, checking in with the people who love and care for me. Letting my network know. I even waited for a little while for that because there were some things that I needed to take care of, just personal matters. I needed to travel. There was an event that was coming up, and I didn't want to have a flood of LinkedIn messages saying, hey, what can I do to support you? When I wasn't going to really be available to respond. Because the worst thing, honestly, you can do is get laid off, post on LinkedIn 30 minutes later, and then decide to take this break where you're doing some of these things. And everybody can process this differently. It's ultimately your choice, right? I decided to process in such a way that I gave myself a little break before I let anybody know, but then I let people know, and then I let my network sort of work for me. When I say that, I don't mean that I gave to my network the task of, hey, go
Right.
out and find me a job, but people will if you over the years. And one of the things, there were a number of accomplishments I'm extraordinarily proud of during my time at Microsoft, and one of those metrics that I tracked was the number of people I had referred to roles and the number of overall roles that I had referred. I referred over 100 people to roles. My success rate wasn't fantastic. It was not going to get me in the Hall of Fame, but there are people who have jobs at Microsoft today as a result of working with me through the referral process. And primarily them, right? I just happened to be fortunate enough to have a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of time that I shared with them where I got to walk, side by side with them along that journey into Microsoft. But I referred hundreds of people to hundreds of roles. And that was awesome, right? So I left knowing that. So even those folks who I did refer to roles who didn't actually end up getting them were like, hey, when I needed help from you, when I asked you for help, you were there to help me. And so I'm here to help you. And so it really became a matter of figuring out what I wanted. And I'm still figuring it out. And that's a struggle. Some folks would look at it. And I had somebody in an interview a couple weeks ago said, well, it's been a long time. I've been out of work since late January, really early February. But they said, what have you been up to? I'm like, well, I've been, and I openly and honestly told them some of the things. I have a graduate degree in creative writing. So I have a poetry manuscript that I dusted off and was like, hey, I want to see this actually published, right? It's officially registered in the library at the school that I went to in order to graduate. That's part of the requirements. But I'd like to get it out there where someone, if they want to spend $9.95 on Amazon, they can go and buy a copy of it, right? That's something I want to have out there. I traveled a little bit. I had some family matters I had to take care of. I did those, so it gave me a little bit of time to really kind of take care of these other things. And of course, I've been job searching. I've been leveraging my network. I was on a call right before this where it was a job and networking mentoring call where we were talking about what success I've had. And I say success, and I make sure that people understand that I don't yet have a role, but I have made it pretty far into the interview process for a number of different roles. And I think that success came as a result of my network. That came as a result of me asking for referrals. It came as a result of me leveraging my network and saying, hey, if you happen to hear of anybody who needs a top secret cleared program manager in this space, I'm available. I went back, you talked about the emotions, and I wanted to touch on this before we move on to the next thing. And that I went back to Microsoft a couple of times since I was no longer employed there. And it's funny because I went back in April for the Bring Your Family to Work Day because I had been involved in the planning of it, and I came back as a volunteer. And so people would come by and they were like, and they didn't realize that I no longer worked there. I said, no, so I had an opportunity there to relive those emotions, but also to kind of let folks know at Microsoft that if they hear of anything, right? I went back this past week to volunteer for an AI initiative, and somebody I ran into who I had worked with, he was like, I didn't see you on Teams recently. I said, because I haven't worked for Microsoft for the last 6 months. And so we've got coffee scheduled. And as a result, it's hard because there isn't an announcement that any of your companies, whatever company it is you're working for, unless you're the CEO of that astronomer company, right? That they're going to let you know that this person is no longer employed there, right? For me, it was one of those things that, hey, I had a job, now I don't have a job there. And so there's 200,000 people there. Microsoft didn't take the time to identify or let everybody know that I didn't work there anymore. So it's up to me individually to reach out to those folks. So what that taught me is I need to look at some of the folks who I did work closely with and reach out to them and let them know. Because Microsoft is an organization that, while it's quite large, it's really a bunch of very small teams, where, it's 20 or 30 different people working on a particular problem within a larger company where, I have dear friends who I worked with over the course of my time there who don't know yet because I just haven't yet had a chance to inform them. So, but going back did help me because I was walking around, I recognized all the front desk staff, chatted with them for a few minutes, and it was just one of those things where, I'm feeling more comfortable with this new role as a Microsoft alum. There's lots of benefits that come with being an alum, part of the alum network. But beyond that, it's just, again, I took my network with me when I left. I took those experiences. I took those people who are now an important part of my network. And I think the thing that was most important to me is when I badged out or clocked out that last time as a Microsoft employee, it didn't change who I was. It changed my employer. And I think that's one of the huge parts about as you separate the pieces of your identity. If you're a volunteer and you work for a company, you're still a volunteer afterwards, right? The things that are important to you, maybe you developed those while at a company. Maybe you sort of came into your own at that company. But changes in part of your identity don't require full and total changes in all of your identity. And so I am still out there volunteering. Yesterday, I was able to spend some time volunteering at a food insecurity program here in the DC area that specifically focuses on service members, people who are actively serving our nation, and veterans. And that might be a shock to some of the people who are listening to this or listening to this recording. The food insecurity rates in our lower enlisted in the military are astronomically high. When you think about, here's a person who's volunteered to serve our country and you think that they can't afford groceries. Some of that, somebody would be like, well, that's because the cost of groceries are so expensive. But I think if you look at, I don't believe that should be the case. And so what can I do about that, right? I can't change the policy. I'm not an elected official, but I can stand and volunteer and help. And so yesterday, 111 families rolled through this sort of semi-mobile place. We set up a bunch of food tables and sort of bagged all these. The person came by, they opened their trunk, and we popped in, and so we had a variety of fresh produce. We had a number of canned goods, shelf-stable items. We of course ended it with Girl Scout cookies because who doesn't like. And we actually had so many leftover Girl Scout cookies. This is a fun story. We had so many leftover Girl Scout cookies that at the end they were like, take some with you. I rode the metro in because if you know anything about DC traffic, it says an hour and a half before you leave your house. And who knows what it'll actually end up being. So I was like, look, the metro is way more reliable. Let me go ahead and take the metro in. So I didn't have a lot of things, space to carry. So I ended up taking a box home with me. And sort of very random. So if you happen to be listening to this and you were traveling the DC metro system yesterday, I'm the guy who was wearing a gray shirt, who was giving away people Girl Scout cookies in the subway, because it was like, who's not going to be happy, right? And every single person, I was like, hey, I got some free Girl Scout cookies. Every single person, except for one, said yes. They accepted them and they were happy. And I sort of timed it in such a way that I gave away Girl Scout cookies throughout my journey home, right? It takes me about an hour and a half to ride the metro from downtown DC to out to where I live. And so I get to my building. I live in a condo. I get to my building and I unpack the last 3 boxes, right? And I say, and the front desk staff was like, well, I thought you were just showing me. I'm like, no, these are for you. Because whose day isn't going to be made better with some Girl Scout cookies? And so it's one of those things that just remember, like, yes, it is. There are definitely tough times, right? Mm-hmm. I just this week got a notification from someone who said basically like, hey, look, I really appreciate you applying to this position. We're not going to consider you further. And it was a person who I have a tremendous network with. It's somebody who I have a really good relationship with. And, it's hard because I was hoping that they would give me a chance. And right now, I'm seeing less and less of that. I think that there's always a risk when an employer picks you up and employs you. There's a risk there, right? Mm-hmm. There's an expectation of a return on investment with that employer-employee relationship. But I'm seeing from all the relationships I have with HR folks and talent acquisition folks, employers really aren't in a position where they're wanting to. This isn't official statements about any specific employer out there. Right. What I am seeing is that employers are less likely to take a risk right now just because of what the market is doing, right? It is a risk. And so maybe you're not going to get that stretch assignment. Maybe you're not going to say, hey, look, I've got all of the skills. And the role I had applied for was a role serving as a chief of staff. I'm absolutely qualified. I know what a chief of staff does. I've never held the title chief of staff, but I know what chief of staffs do and know I could do that. It's program management on steroids. It's hyper focused on an individual, that principal, because there's huge personality management there because the principal is everything, right? And making sure that whatever they need. And so you need to know how they like their coffee. And there are some people who would balk at that. Like I've been a program manager for 25 years. Well, you need to know does this person have allergies? What is this person, do they have dietary restrictions? You also need to be able to speak in somebody else's voice. And I could leverage my creative writing skills for that. You also need to know that, hey, if they're proofreading some talking points that you presented to them while they're getting ready for a presentation and you need to go check the AV, you can't have it be your perspective that, well, that's beneath me. Like sometimes you have to make sure that the tech is working, and that's part of your role. And so that's why I know that I'm perfectly qualified. But the reality is that this particular employer, though I have a great relationship with the person who is in the hiring management chain for this role, the reality is they're just not willing to take that. They want to have someone who's a known entity and has that experience. Because then if somebody fails at it, at least they can't be looked at and said, well, you're the one who made this decision on this. Hey, the person had 10 years of chief of staff experience. That was what I was looking for. I don't know. I wish them success. That's the hardest part about this, is not going, hey, I'm frustrated, which is an emotional reaction, very understandable emotional reaction to what's going on. I'm frustrated with this, and therefore I'm gonna be upset, and I'm not gonna. I want them to be successful. I hope whoever they get is a success in that position. The person who got the job, the last job I had applied for at Microsoft and that I was competitive for, I continue to wish for their success. I continue to want to see them be successful in that role because I think there's a role out there for all of us, right? And your success or my success doesn't take away from anybody else, right? And that's something I think that is really hard in this sort of emotional time when you're in the midst of looking for a job. Is you apply for a job and you sort of start to picture yourself in that role. You say, I'd be amazing at that. And that's true. That's absolutely true. And what's also true is that employer might not see that, or that there might be somebody else that's also as equally amazing. But that's going to happen over and over again. I was such an anomaly. I should never have ended up at Microsoft. Uh,
Me and you both.
well, I never even applied to a job there until I got reached out to by a recruiter who started talking to me about customer success and asking me if I'd heard of customer success and if I'd heard of Microsoft. And I was like, I didn't know that Microsoft was in this particular line of work. I worked specifically within the federal government for all of my career. And so that was one of those things that I'd never applied otherwise. And so the first job I ever applied to at Microsoft was the one that I got. And that's rare because people are talking about how they've applied for years and years and years. And it's been a dream company. And all of a sudden I just sort of pop on and I'm like, okay, let me apply once, right? I was fortunate and blessed to have had the time there. I was grateful for it. I've worked for a lot of amazing organizations over the years, doing some really amazing work, and I'm grateful for that. I don't know what my next role will look like. I know that I am active every day looking for that. I will find out hopefully in the near future what that new role will look like.
Yes.
But for right now, there's still it's the dots. That part of the story hasn't been written. But I am excited to share it when that time comes.
Mm-hmm. I particularly love, and you say it often on our mentorship calls, is that success isn't pie. And you talked about that, like it's celebrating other people and that there's enough success to go around. And I think that, and this comes back to even volunteerism, is it's sometimes hard to show up celebrating somebody else when you're in this funk yourself, but it's often the very thing you need to do to get yourself out of it. And we experience people who are in this layoff period and watching bank accounts dwindle and watching that fear get bigger and bigger in the job process, the hiring process is getting slower and slower. Sometimes because they let recruiters go. So now it's like two recruiters pulling this massive load. And we advise people, like, take a walk, do something positive for somebody else. And even if you can't get out or there aren't, having trouble finding networking events or volunteer, it's hard for me to imagine having a shortage of volunteer opportunities almost anywhere, but it's like, get out of yourself for a minute and watch how that can shift your entire perspective. Like right after this, I'm going to go help somebody just from my church. And I did it last week, and it was just walking into somebody else's space helped realign my own space and say, wow, I'm not as in need as I think I am in this moment. So
that perspective is huge, right? And one of the things that we often talk about in the calls, and I appreciate the pie thing. The pie, thinking about pie always reminds me of that time on The Office where they're doing math related to pies. They change it to do math related to salads. They're like, hey, the math doesn't work out, right? It's just a funny thing to remember. I'm a huge fan of The Office. But when it comes to success not being pie, I think it's one of those things that it's hard when you're in that moment, right? It's hard when you're in that space where you're like, hey, I want a job. I know that I'm worthy. I know that I don't deserve a job, but I know I've done all of the things to set myself up for success. I have a great resume. I have great experience and education. It's just a matter of finding an employer who would, like we started out the conversation, who's willing to take that risk, right? Because every single employment decision is a risk. And the talent pool is flooded right now because there's so much good talent out there. One of the things, and I don't get into when I do my one-on-ones with folks, I tell people, look, I'm not your financial advisor, your priest, your spouse, or your lawyer. So your specific financial status is none of my business. But I also do recognize that everyone is in a different space, right? If you're taking in, let's use nice round numbers, you're taking in $10,000 and you're putting out 20 every single month. Well, that's not going to work very well, right? You're working in a deficit. But if your living expenses, your cost, your quality of life, whatever it is you're at, and you saved and planned for, and you have and this is important. There's privilege in having the ability to save, because I was able to take everything that was in excess of what I needed to spend on a monthly basis to keep the lights on, and keep housed and fed. I was able to soft that away, and so I'm not I'm not independently wealthy, but I'm not in a place where 6 months of unemployment has drastically altered my life. I've still continued to travel. I haven't had to make some decisions. We were talking before we hit live that I probably need a new laptop. And I'm slowing down the process of that. I will get it, but I'm hoping that I can get it as a present to myself, for, as a congratulations present for getting a new job. So I'm waiting. I'm waiting and keeping my fingers crossed. But the reality is that one of the things that we talk a lot about is, in our calls, talk about the resume, we talk about the LinkedIn profile. Something I say again, it's a very military saying, right? Fail to plan to fail. And so I've set aside, emergency reserves, and I've said, different places where, hey, this is, this is when it's, this is somewhat painful. This is, where it gets to be significantly painful. And this is like, oh, this is really bad. I need to break glass in case of emergency, sort of thing. But I'm grateful to have had that opportunity, right? I'm grateful to have been able to do that. One of the things I do want to talk a lot about, because when I was at the AI event the other day at Microsoft, I mentioned, again, because part of it is owning it. Part of it is saying, hey, I no longer work here, right? That's hard because your employer, your job is such a core part of your identity. And so I obviously watched in June and July when so many of our former colleagues were let go. And one of the things that one of the people who was still there, employed by Microsoft, said to me, they're like, I haven't looked at my resume in like 7 years. And I'm like, it might be time to dust that out. Right? And not because I'm wishing their downfall. I'm not wishing for anything other than their continued success. But it's the same thing with your LinkedIn profile. The worst time to check and see if your flat tire, your spare tire is good in your car is when you need it, when you're on the side of the road. And that's a great analogy when thinking about the job search process. The worst time to update your resume is when you had a resume changing event, right? Of course, if you no longer work for an employer, adjust those dates on there, but that resume should show. And it's one of the first things I do when I get a new job. I take the job description that was used for the rep, I plug that in, because we all know this, and this is not to speak ill of the people who write job descriptions, but there's what the job description says I'm going to do, and then there's what I actually end up doing. So over the course of the time that I've had any of these roles, I've modified and adjusted those bullets. So it turns out, it says I was going to do X, Y, and Z. Well, it really was. I did a lot of X, I did almost no Y, and I did a lot of Z. Let me focus a lot on that. And hey, maybe I got some kudos, right? Maybe a customer said, Jonathan was the best thing that happened since sliced cheese. Mm-hmm. Great. Okay. Add some of those commentary. Maybe I did some things that, were stretch assignments or things that are an important part of who I am as a person, when it comes to volunteerism, when it comes to allyship, some of those other things. See if I can integrate those bullets into the resume, but keeping it updated, because when it happened, it was like, okay, well, dust off, the resume wasn't all that dusty. Same with the LinkedIn profile. Yep. A lot of the time at LinkedIn, and I attribute this to the ease with which we could connect on Teams, thanks to our integrated profiles. For those who are watching this who weren't Microsoft employees, at Microsoft, we had the ability to click on a person's name and connect to them through LinkedIn. LinkedIn is wholly owned by Microsoft, while it is independent and operates, independent of Microsoft's like day-to-day oversight. LinkedIn is, so our profiles are there. And so I would regularly, be in a Teams call and be like, oh, I'm not connected to this person. Let me go ahead and connect with this person. And so I grew my connections to Microsoft employees like by, I think, 2000 while I was employed there. And that's great, because now some of those people don't work there anymore. And that's okay. But many of them have found other work in other places since being laid off. And so, or they just moved on naturally, because that's a part of tech, right? Is every 2 to 3 years, we call them boomerangs at Microsoft, but there's people who leave, they'll go somewhere else. They'll go to Google, they'll go to Amazon, they'll go to a small, go to a mid. Maybe they'll come back, maybe they won't. But the great thing about having spent that time to establish that network while I was there is I don't know where that network will take me, but that is my network, and it is something I value. And I talk about when we talk about networking, we talk about the importance of networking and not always just being asking. I would regularly at Microsoft get notifications from folks who are like, I need you to refer me to this role. And I was just like, okay, well, I don't know what's going on with that person, but I would do as much as I could to coach them and say, hey, listen, I really appreciate you reaching out to me. I'd prefer if you throw a please in there, maybe like you know something. Give me a hello before, and help me understand what it is. But some people were just in that moment of desperation, in that space where they were in such a rush to get this in because again, a lot of these roles, they get the first 100 candidates, they shut the rec down, or the first 1,000 candidates. Because if you have a rec open and you collect 10,000 resumes, there's no way somebody is looking through 10,000 resumes. It's just never going to happen. And I don't fault HR and talent acquisition folks for that. Because Jacqueline, you mentioned it a few minutes ago, one of the places that got impacted quietly, but I think most significantly, is if your job is talent acquisition, if your job is recruitment, and all of a sudden they're doing massive layoffs, well, they're going to cut that too. The problem with that is that now all of those recs that you were working are now in someone else. And so, yes, the company can lay somebody off, but then some of those companies are laying folks off and then immediately rehiring at either lower levels, or they're using it as a culling mechanism, right? They're using it, and that hurts. That hurts to think about, like, to be cold in the herd, right? Because we want to be a part of community. We all want to keep our job,
Right.
And so to all of a sudden not have that. And so people love to go and badmouth HR and talent acquisition folks. And I would just say this, I'm not going to say what you should and shouldn't say online, but give them some grace. Give them some grace and understand that these folks, I've had the fortunate pleasure of meeting a ton of them and hearing from them. And it's hard to look through 100 resumes and see 100 great candidates and know that you have to make a distinction and you have to differentiate them. You have to make a choice because no one is going to look at an open role and say, I'm going to have my hiring manager, who, by the way, remember, this person is hiring because they have a need on their team. So that means there's already too much work, right? Because when hiring actions take place, there's enough work to justify that new headcount. And so this hiring manager is already dealing with enough plates in the air. And now they're going to interview 100 individual people. That's never going to happen. And you can fault the process and say that's wrong. But the reality is that once a recruiter screens through all the ones, and sometimes it's a system, right? If a system says it's a requirement to have a bachelor's degree and you don't have a bachelor's degree, you're going to get screened out automatically. But some of those, once that's done and a recruiter looks at the pool and they say, I've got 100 candidates, maybe they do look through all 100, but they're not pitching 100 to the hiring manager. That's just not happening because they may pitch 5 to 10. Maybe if you're lucky, there's 20. And then that hiring manager whittles that list down. Because I guarantee you that no hiring manager out there has an open rack, which means they need work and they need help, is going to interview 25 people for a role. They're just not.
Yeah.
And that's tough because who knows where you fit in that process. And that's where I go back to the referrals and I go back to the networking. I go back to the success that I've had in getting this far into the interview process for every single job that I've interviewed for since this transition in January has come as a result of the referrals. And so I regularly reach out to folks. And if I don't have somebody in my network or I don't have a lot of people, then I'll reach out to people. I'll go into LinkedIn and use the search for the company and find people in my area and say, hey, I'd love to connect because I'm trying to grow my network in this specific company. Do I get success? Do I get a connection from every single one of those people? No. But you're not going to get connected by people by looking at their profiles on LinkedIn and saying, oh, I wish I had this person as a connection because that would help me in my job search.
Yeah. You brought up so when we're talking about networking, and particularly like volunteerism, and I want to say it doesn't have to even be volunteerism, but it's kind of get yourself into different places than just LinkedIn and then just online, and then like think outside the box. And I think about this because I was thinking about so much of what you're talking about and the emotions after a job search and even the frequency of updating a profile. So for me, I was like every time a project finished, I'd get in there and update a profile. As soon as I had numbers that were measurable, that showed success, I'd get in there and update it. And I took a different approach on Layoff. I did actually post immediately, and then I got overwhelmed and I put the green banner up, and then 24 hours later it was down because I couldn't keep up with the outpouring of affection and thanks and offers from people that I'd helped. But going back to getting into different places, this last 2 weeks ago, I had this opportunity just to an amazing opportunity actually to go unfurl the flag at a Seahawks game, but it was in partnership with the Blue Star families. And as I was there, somebody's like, "Hi, I don't know you," and it turned out she runs part of the nonprofit, or the part of Blue Star's families. Have her business card now, and she heard what I'm working on during my layoff time, and it just immediately started opening doors. And then I did a one-off call with someone who is tied to a lot of organizations. She was just, okay, this organization needs help. This one, they're doing um, networking events for veterans, things like that. And I kind of laughed. I said, we have all these streaming services, and wouldn't it be nice if we could just have one login and all of us just watch what we want to watch and just charge us money if it's not available. And I was like, wouldn't it be nice to kind of do that same thing with the veteran community, where it's like, okay, well, you're doing things and you're doing things and you're doing things. What if we all met at the same place and combined those resources? But it's when you do something different, you've just increased your opportunity to find people in different spaces, working in different spaces, doing different things that could be the breakthrough that you're looking for. So I was just wanted to kind of talk about the doing something different than what everybody else is doing, being in different spaces where everybody else might be. And we talk about it in the mentorship call. How do you get yourself on that short stack
Yep.
that hiring managers are reviewing, or that a recruiter looked at
Yep.
because you have built a relationship with them, or you bonded over, I don't know, tacos instead of jobs, right? I have one recruiter we talk about, she posted pictures of her dogs and then posting pictures of my dogs. And then all of a sudden we're texting each other. And like now we're friends. It's not just, I need something from you. It's,
Yeah. I think that space you talked about getting out and volunteering. One of the things you said earlier, I think that is really key, and I've heard a variety of different ways, is talking about treating the job search as a job, right? And recognizing that, and there have been a ton of studies. So if you don't like what I'm saying and you deny it, or you want to call it fake news, that's fine. Go out and do your own searching for it. But there is a limit to productivity, right? And after 6, 7, 8 hours, your productivity starts to diminish. Trust me, I've tried. There is no amount of coffee that will replace productivity, right? You may be energized, you may be fidgety, you may be shaking the computer because you're trying to type. But as a former intelligence analyst, I used to live on coffee, and survived on caffeine. But after 6 to 8 hours of job searching, and I include networking, LinkedIn, I include just the application. Some days I give it 4 to 6 hours. Some days it's only 4. Some days I have to skip because I need to get outside and do some of those other things. Yesterday, I didn't spend a ton of time networking. I had a long train ride, as I mentioned, to get to the volunteer event and to get back from it. But while I was there, I met with some other folks. And I got to talk to them not only about this volunteer event. Food insecurity is one of the things that I do personally believe shouldn't exist when it comes to our military and our veteran community, right? I think we can solve it. I think we can solve food insecurity and the housing crisis, specifically with the veteran and military population, and I think that it's worth investing in. So I'll go and I'll invest in it. I'll invest my time and my energy. While I was there, I met a number of different folks from different backgrounds, and I mentioned to them, I connected with them, got their contact information about another project I'm working on as a volunteer while in between roles. And that's something, Jacqueline, you and I have talked a lot about how much we both enjoy learning people's stories, right? I'm sort of amateur historian. When I have family buried at Arlington National Cemetery, and when I walk through there and I take people around, or I run into somebody, I see them looking at the map. I'm like, hey, is there anything in particular you're looking for? I'll let them know, right? Ira Hayes. If you're a Johnny Cash fan, you'll know the name. The Ballad of Ira Hayes is about one of the men who raised the flag on Iwo Jima. He's buried there. So is General Pershing. So is Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So is Medgar Evers. So is Colin Powell. The names I could just roll off the tip of my tongue because I've been through the cemetery My great grandfather is buried there, right? My father will be buried there. Those are things that every single one of those people has a story, right? And so one of the projects I've been working on with the Library of Congress is they have a Veterans History Project database, which gives veterans an opportunity. Veterans, the qualifications there are if you've served more than 180 days of active duty, you have an opportunity to go to the Library of Congress, sit down at the library, and tell your story. Now, obviously, not everybody lives in DC, and so that's not available to everybody. But if you record being interviewed for at least 30 minutes is the goal. They have all sorts of resources available online that show what you need to do in order to submit. You could submit your story to that collection. And so as somebody who likes talking with people, as somebody who likes recognizing that everybody has a story, I've been spending some time going out there and doing those interviews. So I interviewed a couple people last month. I'm actually going on a walkthrough tomorrow at the library with a couple of other people who work for a number of different organizations, getting them to kind of help me start spreading the word. Because the goal isn't to there's millions of veterans in our country. Mm-hmm. To know that the collection itself has only a little over 100,000 pieces to it tells me there's a lot of people who don't know about the collection. And our collection is more complete by making sure that everyone has had a chance to tell their story. Now, at the end of the day, some veterans don't want to tell their story, right? Mm-hmm. Some veterans don't want to relive those experiences, and that's okay. So it's not a pressure pitch when I go and talk to folks about it. I just say, hey, look, I know you have a story. If you want to tell it, it doesn't even have to be about any of the things, because one of the questions in the sort of general questions that they ask is about deployed experiences. Some folks don't want to talk about that, and that's okay. But we all have interesting experiences that we remember. A lot of my first memories that come to mind are the entire underground market that exists with the meals ready to eat. Those are those brown packages of meals. And like some had jalapeno cheese in them, some had peanut butter, some had different desserts in them. But there was a whole market of trading, like where somebody would be like, I'll trade you 2 jalapeno cheeses for this dessert or something. And it's funny because you realize the value of some of these pieces and parts, right? They have tiny little Tabasco sauces. So while I don't use Tabasco, nothing against Tabasco, it's just not my favorite hot sauce. But whenever I see those tiny little bottles, it brings me back, right? I haven't told my story yet to the Library of Congress. When I was there the last time, my main POC who works for the library was like, it would really be good for you to sit down and tell your story since you're out here getting all these other people to tell theirs. And I said, it'll happen one day, but I'm not ready for it yet. When I am ready for it, I will certainly be excited to have it added to the collection. But right now it's about spreading the word and getting that out there. So when it comes to volunteerism, when it comes to getting out there and changing your routine, right? I think it's important to go into those spaces, and it's not what I lead with necessarily, but when I'm out there and I meet someone and we're just sort of getting to know you, and again, like I said earlier, in DC, we lead with where you work and what you do before we even get to what the name of a person is. Often, and so it's really about talking to folks and just letting them know, like, hey, if you happen to hear of anything, right? If I'm at a networking event, the first thing I do is I whip out my phone and I ask them, do you know about the QR code on LinkedIn? Some are like, yeah, yeah, I'm old school. I know that, right? And some are like, what are you talking about, right? And I show them, I don't even carry cards around with me anymore because my LinkedIn profile has all of my contact information. Yep. So if a person wants to get in touch with me, they do. And so what I do is I connect. And right there on the spot while I'm sitting there, I say, met at such and such event, would love to connect. Hit send. Right? So that way it helps me to remember too, because I go to so many networking events that I'm like, where did I meet this person? Right? If they've handed me a card, I'll typically go home, and before I do anything that night, no matter how tired I am, I will take those cards out of my pocket and I'll put the date and the event, because it's just that way I can remember. So when I update my contact database, I'll know, hey, I met this person here. Hey, this is my point of contact here. Hey, this is, and so those are really important things. And going back to the volunteer thing, I do believe strongly in time, talent, and treasure. And I think that that's one of those things that when we talk in Mentorship Live, we talk about the gift of time, right? And what I may not have in money, in treasure, I may not have in talent, I can make up for in time. And I can give an hour to myself to look at resumes. I can give an hour to myself to say, hey, this is what this job search looks like. Mm-hmm. I don't have any evidence, so if you're a very strict science person and you're like, well, I want evidence, I want data to support this. I don't have any evidence to support that I haven't found a job as a result of my volunteering activities. But I do believe that I can do both. I can help other people in this community and look for a job at the same time. because we're talking about a couple hours a week, right? I personally believe that everyone out there has a couple hours that they can give to another community to make that community stronger, better, to make the world a little bit better, to help remind people that everyone is a star and to shine. I think we all do that, right? And that's what Mentorship Live means to me, right? It's an hour every Friday where I get on, celebrate folks' successes, talk to people about where they're at. We have had as little as just you and me on a call.
Yep. And it was fantastic.
It was, right. It gave us an hour to sit and catch up. But one of the things I think that was that I'd love to share is there were those moments of doubt and saying, like, hey, is this worth it? If nobody's showing up, are we doing any good? And the reality is that we just needed some help. We needed a little bit of a boost, and we got that. There were a number of recruiters that we've started to tag in our posts about Mentorship Live. There's a number of things that we've changed in terms of our approach to broadcasting and advertising this that have helped. There are still times when we get on and it's just 8 to 10 people on, and that's okay because we both agree, and this is something that the core group of mentors and hosts on that call, you, myself, Glenn, and of course we couldn't do it without Ali helping moderate. We all agree that if it helps one person, it'll be worth it, right? And that's hard, and that's one of those things that when you think about a company like Microsoft that's so driven by KPIs, and they're like, well, you got to help 10,000 people or it won't be worth it. I'm telling you my KPI, and we've all agreed, we work from the KPI of one. If it's helping one person, if this call, for me, one, it's an opportunity to spend some time with you, which I'll always take and I'll always love and enjoy. But if this hour of time that we spent together helps one person, it gives someone hope. It helps them recognize the importance of community. It gets somebody out into their neighborhoods to volunteer. Like, I do believe that anybody listening to this can take some nugget from it and go like, you know what, I'm going to write that down. I'm going to put that on a t-shirt and whatever. I know that there are those things in here. We'll see what happens when AI splits this all apart and shows, hey, these are the clips that we want to highlight. But it's like one of the things that I love sharing, that you love saying about, and I'll never do it justice, so I want you to do it. But your t-shirt slogan idea.
Oh yeah, my t-shirt slogan, that we're not everybody's cup of tea, but we're somebody's kombucha. And I say, don't worry about the cup of teas that drop off. Look for your kombucha, because they're the ones that, and that goes back to sharing success too, because it's okay. And I have career coaches that I could, I'm trying to build a business where I do specifically help people and coach and stuff. I keep giving these maybe too much away, but it goes back to I was like, if I just become a content creator, that's fine too. And I have a blast with that. So it's, I can share other people's stuff because they're not gonna I'm not everybody's kombucha. I know I'm not. Maybe I've got too many gray hairs or whatever. I just don't resonate with someone. If they resonate with somebody else and I get them there, when I first started using LinkedIn, there were two things I wanted. It was my career gap to never be a problem again, and I wanted to be a connector. And it took a minute for me to realize that I can connect people that do the same thing as me to other people, and that it's okay to be open-handed in all of this. So that took a minute for me to get to, because I had fear. And I think that fear can hold us back on so many levels of even connection. I mean, I know that does, because people are often afraid to post. They're afraid to reach out. They're afraid to be themselves. They're afraid, they're like fear. I say this too, it could also probably go in it's not really sloganish, but our brains are designed to keep us alive, and it's going to manufacture what ifs. It manufactures negative what ifs because it's looking for danger, right? And I say pause and ask the other questions. What if this thing that I'm doing right now changes my life? What if this volunteer event that I go to is the time that I meet somebody? And it's like shifting that focus. What if it's the best thing I've ever done instead of the most fearful thing I've ever done? Helps so much. And we do have Laura's chiming in on LinkedIn, just agreeing that taking time away to do other things for productivity on the networking, a +1 on that, and then just the proponent of volunteerism, also +1 on that. One of the questions I had, or just kind of points that I wanted to highlight again and bring out and hear your perspective on, is when it comes to people's story, and we say it a lot, it's like, make it about the other person, even if you're desperate. And I know this for a fact. If I ask more questions, then I say more words, the other person leaves feeling more connected to me. even though they learned very little about me, because I was curious about them first. So even if you're sending messages on LinkedIn, even if you're posting on LinkedIn, talk to somebody else. Even if you're sharing a struggle you're having, think about who else might be there having the same struggle.
Sure.
And let me talk to that person. And like, there's a post I want to do really soon just on, sometimes I feel like everything is shouting into the void with no return,
Mm-hmm.
but we also don't know who's reading or watching or absorbing or the impact we're making until one day you meet them somewhere and you're like, I love your LinkedIn post. I'm like, fascinating. You've never even liked one. So
Yeah.
you
I,
don't know the impact you're making.
that validation is huge, and I love having those opportunities. And I think that again, if you're posting just to be helpful, we talk a lot, in sort of our one-on-one sessions. We talk about some of the algorithms of, and this isn't. I'm not going to start bashing LinkedIn, but one of the frustrating things that I do have with LinkedIn and the algorithm, excuse me, is how they downgrade, the reposts or the external links, right? And I get, the LinkedIn experience, just like Facebook, Instagram, I want to keep everybody in that space, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because of ad revenue, because of all the other things, right? But it's frustrating because I want to share a job link, right? And I know that it's going to destroy my algorithm, right, or my impressions. But I'm okay with that, right? Because if it gets to one person, if one person's able to share it, one of the things I love to do about scrolling through LinkedIn is seeing if somebody's reacted to something, and then I may not be connected with that person, so I may see that I'm a second or third hand connection. Finding at this point, my network is robust enough to where like it's rare that I'll find a third hand connection, but I love finding them, right? Because they're out there, right? There's lots of people out there that I'm not connected with, or they're not connected, through a first or second hand connection. But one of the things when I see people react to those things, I'll celebrate that person's new job announcement, that person graduating from school. And then if they're in an industry or in a particular company, or maybe, hey, I love connecting with fellow, and this is the thing that you talked a second ago about posting. I do some mentoring with American corporate partners, and the particular mentee that I'm working with right now, he did not want to use the approach that I have to LinkedIn, which is, hey, submit 100 LinkedIn connection requests. Because when I met him, he had 3 connection requests or something like that. I was like, look, you got to be connected to more people, right? There isn't a magic number, but it's got to be more than 3, right? And that can sound a little bit contradictory. You're like, I thought you just said there's not a magic number. There isn't, but it's got to be more than a few. It needs to be at least a few hundred, right? Just because that means a few hundred people are going to see your stuff, be able to have the potential to react to it, right? And so I've been encouraging him to get more comfortable with posting. You talked about that fear, and so during one of our recent mentorship sessions, we do a one-on-one mentorship twice a month. I said, what do you want to post about? He's like, I don't know. I said, like let's leverage ChatGPT. And so I plugged in a prompt in ChatGPT. ChatGPT, give me 8 to 10 things that this person, I use this hyperlink, could post about in order to talk about data science. This person, gave him a little bit of a background, because one of the things ChatGPT LinkedIn doesn't allow bots, so it won't connect to that person's LinkedIn profile. So I provided a little bit of more information about this person, right? And it gave me 8 to 10 ideas, right? Was every single one of them, amazing? No. But we sat there and I shared my screen and I showed him. I said, this is how easy it is, right? Has he posted? I don't know. I haven't seen it. It hasn't come up in my feed, but it's something I'll check before our next mentoring call, because I think it's important to get out there and start posting, and to no longer be afraid of that post button. You post something and it doesn't get doesn't get a ton of impressions, or it doesn't get any comments. You and I have talked about, and I think it's important to share for this community. We've poured our heart and soul into some of these posts, right? I mean, like, just sat down and just been like, hey, this is what's going on, and it's gotten no reaction, right? No traction, 1 or 2 likes, whatever it is, or comments, and then I'll post a AI created graphic about how I'm still open to work and how I had recently, and all of a sudden that gets like blown out of the water, right? Like that gets a ton of impressions, that gets a ton of reactions, right? It wasn't a cry for help. It was just
Like
me
funny.
and honestly saying to the community, hey, this is where I'm at right now in my job search. And it's okay. It's okay, because this stuff is going to happen to you in the process. And I think I want to, through my platform and voice, I want to normalize these moments where it's like it's tough. You talked about our brains and how our brains are wired, right? This fear of rejection. Rejection hurts. and whether that be walking up to somebody at a bar and asking for their number, or a job posting saying, hey, like, unfortunately, it doesn't matter how nice they say it. I mean, I would love to put this out to all the employers out there who would listen to this. Unfortunately, we have received many great candidates. All of the ways that they try and soften the blow, like, it doesn't, for me, like, help at all. It's just like, just say no. Like, some quick, not today. Like, not going to happen for you. I almost feel like that would be a lot easier for me, because I have to read this whole long post about, like, these multi-paragraphs, like, we have received many amazing candidates. You are amazing too. But unfortunately, we're going to choose somebody else who's more amazing than you. And you're just like, come on, man. I just could have taken the no and just moved on. Take the loss and move on. Like, I don't want all that extra.
I was laughing in my head because I'm like, I think if I'm ever a hiring manager, I might have to put my slogan, we're not everybody's cup of tea, but we're somebody's kombucha. Sorry, you aren't my kombucha.
Yeah.
And then I was like, they could have a sliding scale of how likely you are to ever get employed with them as a hiring manager. Like, this was a 1, like, just don't even try again. Or 4.9, and then you're like, okay, it went really well, and maybe they actually will look at my resume. Anyway, there's me revolutionizing the rejection notice.
And the thing is that, like, I share this super irrelevant factoid with everybody, right? I'm relatively tall. I'm a little over 6 feet. And when I was growing up, people would always try and sell me basketball shoes when I would go and need new shoes. And I'm like, I can't play basketball, right? So one of the things I often tell people, I'm like, look, if the job requirement says I have to be able to dunk a basketball, I'm never going to get that job, and that's okay. I'm not going to apply for it, right? Because I don't have that vertical, right? You would think that, like, when I'm standing up, like, I just got no jumps, right? But I think it's interesting because when you talk about those rejections, right? You talk about the required versus desired. One of the things I had an exchange actually this week with, I applied for a job in the evening. Next morning, I got a note, and it actually came from a recruiter. So I'm like, yeah, whatever, I'll take my chance here. So I sent an email back to the recruiter and said, hey, I really appreciate this. And I do. That person looked at my resume and they said, sorry, you're not going to be.
Yep.
They included their email address, or at least they sent it from their email. And so I said, hey, let me go ahead and say, what can I do to better myself as a candidate? Because ultimately, I want a job, right? It's not going to work out. I didn't say, I can't believe you didn't, deny me this opportunity, right? Certainly, you could feel those emotions. Don't ever hit send on something like that. But what they ended up sending me back was an actual description from the contract requirements. And one of the things that they had listed as highly desired was actually a requirement. And so I sent them back a screenshot and said, hey, listen, I appreciate you letting me know. I would never have applied for this job if I had known that. It wasn't to be able to dunk a basketball. It was to have a PMP. I don't have a PMP, although I've been a program manager for a long time. I said, I wouldn't have applied for this job, because what I ultimately did, because of the way the job rec was written, I ultimately wasted my time. I wasted your time. I reversed that order, right? I said, look, you're going to spend a lot of time screening candidates out because your job rec is written in such a way that says this is required and this is desired. But what you have listed in the desired is actually a requirement. And so just a gentle nudge. I didn't hear back from that person. I don't know if I've been blacklisted from them. I will never be employed by them. That's okay, because I took that moment of time to, one, ask, hey, look, what can I do to better myself as a candidate? And I gave them a little bit of feedback. I don't know. I tried to be as polite and cordial about it. I'm not going to bash them. I'm not going to list the company, because I don't think that that's productive or helpful or healthy at all. There's a lot. It's hard. These job recs are being put out, constantly churning, right? But I said, hey, look, this is probably why you're going to see a lot of people like me who are program managers who don't have PMPs, because it said highly desired, not required. And so people are going to apply. And so you're going to have to send all of these emails. I'm probably not going to be the only person who's going to send you a response back. But I think that the fear of posting, I think the fear of putting yourself out there, stems from that rejection. It stems from that, like, well, they might laugh at you. If again, like, there are people out there, I'm sure, who don't like my content. But I can't tell you how nice it is and how much it warms my heart when I see people respond, when I see them, they're like, hey, I love seeing what you're doing out there, right? And again, like you said, they've never reacted to a single post that I've made. They've never commented on a single post that I made, but they've seen it. Mm-hmm. And it's impacted them in what I would describe as a favorable way, and that feels great, right? I'm not putting it out there just for that. I'm putting it out there to share information. And so the same thing goes for any of the networking events that I share. The same thing goes for any of the postings, the job postings that I repost. If a person sees it and they ended up applying for it, or a person ends up going to a networking event where they're able to get a new role, that's awesome. I don't expect to be, it's not an Oscar award where I'm expecting to be thanked in their speech. I'm doing it because I think that that's what I want somebody else to do. And actually, I have people doing for me right now. I can't tell you the number of emails I have to respond to on LinkedIn of folks who are saying, "Hey, I saw this posting and thought of you," and that's huge. That is so huge as you're going through that process. And my wish to everybody who listens to this recording or is listening to it live, my wish is that you all have networks that do that. If your network isn't doing that, I'm not saying you have a bad network, but definitely keep investing in it. Ask your network what you can do for them. All this time, Jacqueline and I are both looking for work, right? But Jacqueline and I aren't competing for the one remaining job left in the world, right? It would be a terrible competition if it were. They should pick.
But I don't know. You might it depends on if they want technical or a good interviewer or something.
I will withdraw from the process if we're both competing for the last job available on planet Earth. I'll withdraw. You can have it. It would be my honor. But the fact is that while you're out there searching, ask people what you can do. Like the recommendations thing, I share this with people all the time. Again, another piece of LinkedIn that if you look back, you're like, well, you've only had recommendations posted for the last year and a half. Because I honestly didn't even think about them. The first recommendation I got was from somebody I mentored one-on-one. I spent a lot of time with them, and I didn't have to ask them. They just went and submitted it. And what was neat about that was it clued me into this thing that I didn't know was out there, right? And so I now went back through all the people I've mentored over the course of the last 2 years, and I've sent them a quick little note. Said, hey, we spent some time together, whether it was an hour, whether it was multiple hours, whatever. I didn't go into those details, but we spent some time together in the recent past. I hope that what I provided you helped. And if it did, and you're willing to, I'd love for you to write a little recommendation. Please feel free to leverage ChatGPT, because that makes it easier, right? You're giving them, ways to very easily get you the thing that you want. And again, I don't know if anybody's reading those recommendations and saying, like, that's the guy or that's the gal I want to have on my team. But it's another thing to round out your LinkedIn profile. It's another thing to make you a more complete candidate. And I can spend time asking for those, but I've also spent time just randomly submitting to folks who have spent a lot of time helping me in this process, right? I've got time on my hands. And so I've spent some time helping people and saying, hey, look, I really appreciate your help. And saying, hey, it was a pleasure working with you and X, Y, or Z company. And doing that because I want to invest in my network.
Yeah. We do have a couple questions. I know we're really at time, and I know we could keep going for hours here. But one of the questions was, do you think it's appropriate, or it's kind of a little bit of both continuation of one question. Do you think it's damaging to a candidacy to flag posts on LinkedIn where they're saying they're remote, but they're not actually, or the job description is not accurate to what is there? And my gut would be no, because I don't think they're going to know you did it. In a world where 100 or 1,000 people are applying for jobs, I don't think they're going to be like, ooh, this one. But I've done that. I was in an interview once, and I just felt really badgered by one of the berated almost by one of the interviewers. So when the hiring manager emailed me, I was like, it was an internal transfer at that point. I was like, this was an unpleasant interview experience, and thanks for resources that you gave me on improving skills or whatever. That was very kind, but I was like, it might just be worth having a conversation, because I actually was almost told to shut up at one point because I wasn't getting to the answer that the interviewer was looking for, and I never would have. They were looking for something that just wasn't a place where I go, which
sure.
But
yeah, I would say different folks have different skill qualifications, right? I'm not going to say, I'm not going to suggest that I'm the best interviewer out there, but I do think it's really important. One of the things I did really appreciate, I did have a chance to interview folks when I was at Microsoft for a few roles. And there's an extensive process that you go through where they try to limit and reduce the amount of bias that you have by showing that you should ask the same questions of every candidate. You shouldn't get on the call and be like, oh, okay, I'm an Army vet. This person's an Army vet. Let me soft roll it, right? I need to ask those same questions, and I need to make sure that I get that information. I've heard people, I've been on calls where somebody's like, give me your 90-second elevator pitch. And 6 minutes later, they're still talking about stuff. And we've only reached, like, in the third grade, I did such and such. You're like, hold on. That's not, I don't know what elevator you're riding, but that we've already arrived, right?
Mm.
And so, but I would still, I think, find a way to be like, hey, in an effort to, apologies for interrupting, but I think there's ways to do that in a way. But one of the things that I will say, and I've met a lot of folks in tech, and I've got a unique personality, right? As a former signals intelligence analyst, I think some of that just is personality dependent, right? I would never cut someone off and be like, wrap it up, in the middle of an interview. That just feels like, if you run long, we're running long right here, right? If you turn to me, you're like, wrap it up, we got to go. I'm happy to, in the interest of time, say, hey, we're gonna stop in 10 minutes and do some things. But I think to address the flagging and posting things, I regularly flag posts or if a profile it looks like they're impersonating somebody. It is frustrating because the quality, because again, you get back to the speed, the churn. Folks will advertise something as remote or hybrid in an effort to broaden the pool of candidates. And then when you get to the actual screening process, they're like, yes, it's remote, but you have to, and again, this is the company make these decisions because it's their company, right? But if you're telling me it's remote, but you need to live within the zip code, you should specify that in the job description, right? And there are reasons for that, right? There's a friend of mine is going to be posting a job soon for a mid-Atlantic salesperson. Well, the requirements are that you live in the mid-Atlantic region, right? And that's important because this job requires an extensive amount of travel, right? If you're going coast to coast, that's hard. That's going to be hard on the travel budget. That's going to be hard on the individual, right? If you're spending 4 or 5 hours, right? Doing that's difficult. Cross time zones, the cost of hotels, all that stuff, starts to add up and rack up. But I think that one of the things I think that I would ask folks who are listening to this, give those folks grace. If it's poorly written and they say, move on, sitting down and chastising them or correcting their behavior. There's a lot of bad behavior out in the world. If you're the type of person who's listening to this and you want to start policing bad behavior, I would welcome you to come to the DC area and teach people how to merge, or what that triangle sign says that's spelled YIELD, because we need help. And so if you want to help police the world, please, by all means, I will help feed and house you if you're willing to travel here to do that, because people in DC don't know how that stuff works. But no, I think it's tough because there is sort of a sense of justice that we all have, and we want to be treated right as a candidate and to apply for a role. And I've had a similar thing that has come up when it comes to salaries, right? If a salary is being advertised as this range, you get into the screening process and they tell you that it's actually a much lower range. No one's going to complain if it's a much higher range. Let's be real, right?
Right. Absolutely.
The range is this, and then they offer you double that. You're like, okay, I'll take more.
I'm on it.
Yeah, but it's reasonable enough to be upset if somebody offers you less, right? And that's frustrating, right? So you definitely don't want that. But I think the thing I'll say is you individually to decide how much time you want to spend on that and then move on, right? It is something that I do plan on making a post about this recruitment process that happened recently that I was just talking about the difference between requirements and desires. I have excluded, and I've even thought about copying and pasting the text away into a plain text document, so that way if someone's really savvy, they could figure out what company it is, because all these companies use different fonts and different backgrounds.
Right.
The point isn't to target the company, right? Because I see it all over the place. The point is to say to people, hey, look, there's a lot of reasons why you might not be getting the job. But if you hyper-focus on that, then you're going to really miss out. And this is a perfect opportunity, especially in honor of Tay-Tay's engagement. Favorite things in the world. I'm a huge Swiftie, and I have no problem.
Me too. We've bonded over that too.
Love Swift. One of my favorite things to watch the video is Taylor Swift Shake Off, right? So it's hard, to have those gut punches. It's hard to get that rejection. But, shaking it off is huge. I don't know anybody who watches, if you're a Taylor Swift fan, obviously. I don't know anybody who watches that video of her and Shake It Off and isn't sort of happy as a result of it, right? And I'm not saying you have massive depression, you should be watching Shake It Off instead of taking your prescribed medication. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that like it's like how much time do you want to invest in that, right? Mm-hmm. Feel your feelings, I'm all about it, but I watch it a lot. And sometimes it takes 2 or 3 watchings, right? But it's an opportunity to be like, hey, look, how important is this? How much time do I want to focus in energy? Am I really going to change this person? Is what's at the root of this, right? Is what's at the root of this that I'm frustrated because I didn't get selected? Am I frustrated because of how how people are being treated? Not just me, but sort of people in general. Yeah, sure. But am I going to change that, right? How much time and energy do I want to spend on that versus I still need a job? At the end of this call, I'm going to go back to job searching, right? Because that's what I'm in that position right now where I need a job. If I'm spending a ton of time worrying about righting the wrongs, all the wrongs in the world, I'm not going to find a job, right? And I'm going to run out of that emergency fund.
It's a lot of negative energy that you're building up anyway. But
I'm taking that stuff.
All right. I actually, speaking of volunteering, I do have to get to my volunteer opportunity here in a minute. But if anybody is watching or watch the recording and you're like, wow, I like what they're talking about, we do every Friday. We've only canceled it one time, including Black Fridays and all of those things. And it was when it landed on the 4th of July, the actual 4th of July. Every Friday, both of us, and then Glenn Life Height is there as well. And the link is aka.ms/mentorship live. I will make sure it's in the notes. And then it happens 10:30 Pacific and 1:30 Eastern. Please come ask your questions. Bring them. Obviously, we love to talk. I know if I didn't have to be somewhere that Jonathan and I could just go on for another hour and a half without thinking about it because I can almost give his answers on the mentorship questions, and he could give mine because we've done it for several years now. So join us there, and the recording will be on the I'm doing TikTok lives, and they don't like you to say other social media platforms at all. But it'll be posted on the YouTube. I'm going to say it here. And then one of the things I've been trying is TikTok lives, and they're so, you want to talk about talking into a void. That is the weirdest experience ever. But I will be talking later this afternoon after I get back from volunteering about should you use AI in content creation. So find me there. Come join. Please come join. So I have somebody asking a question. That would be amazing. It really is a place where you talk with no feedback and people come in and come out and you're like, are you staying or are you going? But I'm trying a new thing. Just literally what we were talking about. If it's not working, go do something else. I'm not saying LinkedIn isn't working. It's just, this has become my new curiosity and fascination, and I'm meeting job seekers there. So it's like, your people may not be on this platform. They could be anywhere else. So,
and we could certainly do another session. So I think it's a great way to end it in this session number 1 with us. We're volunteering. I'm going to go do some of that as well. But I'm going to get back to the job search for the rest of this afternoon. It was great speaking with you.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll book again and pick a new topic because we have words, Jonathan. I have words that we can keep sharing over and over again. So thank you for people who've chimed in on chat, and we appreciate you being here. We say that at the end of mentorship calls is none of this is successful without people in attendance and hanging out with us and asking questions. So that we're not just available on those Friday calls, but we can reach out in messages too. And there could be a delay, but we usually try to get back to whoever we can. So thank you for being here. Until next time, keep volunteering, keep doing the things, and thank you so much for your time here and in other places.